Great. Where's Scott? Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hey there.
Nice to see.
Hi, everybody.
Nice
Hi,
to see
everyone.
so many of you.
Hi, Jennifer.
Some who've been with us for several of these.
Turn it around so I can stand.
First timers. It's always so much fun to see real living faces and people and couples.
That's a nice thing to say. Oh, that was before you showed everybody.
And you're not
Hey, Ron.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the introvert among us, so I'm hurting.
You'll be taken care of. Don't worry.
Yeah, thank you, Ron.
Oh, look,
We're
there's
coming
Ron.
back.
We got it. We got it.
Look at Miranda with her
It's cute. It's cute. It's a fascinator.
fascinator. The pink-
Happy Oaks, everyone.
Oh, that's cute.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, I know this would have been Oaks. We're still celebrating around here, but yeah, different times, right?
Yeah, we have a 6 o'clock curbside at the 4 houses that are here, and we're going to have cocktails, and everybody prepares an hors d'oeuvre, and people move away from the little table, and you put your hors d'oeuvre on, and you get them all, and then you sit down and drink your own wine.
I love it. Socially distanced appetizers. I love it.
That's it. It's good. You'll smell
Paying
them.
attention, Ron. That might be the format for our first in-person gathering at the Speed. We'll work with Wilshire on that. Well, we have a lot to cover, so I want to just get going. Again, it is always so much fun for the extroverts, especially among us like me, to see so many faces. I love the fact that it's so much fun to see couples also. It's kind of makes this more domestic and more intimate. So thank you all for joining. Those of you who are singles, couples, and more, welcome to what you might consider either the strangest Oaks party you've ever been to, or the fourth of the Speed's virtual curator events. These are all about thanking you for your support, which has been continuous when we were closed for renovation, when we were open for 4 years, where we're closed because of COVID-19, and when we're going to be reopened again. So this is our big thank you. We know how much you love the way we invite everyone to celebrate art, and we want to do our part to share that with you. I hope that some of you heard or saw the story on Monday on WFPL where their brand new arts reporter, who is herself living in isolation, has not yet visited an arts institution in Louisville, did a great story on the Speed and how our collection is sheltering in place. And she interviewed Kim Spence, our Director of Collections and Exhibitions, and talked to our security folks and preps to understand how we're looking after the collection while we're closed, and even how things that people are interested in, like Kim talked last week about behind the scenes, how we monitor humidity levels from off-site. Just as we're protecting the collection as it shelters in place, I want to let you know that this week we are turning to planning for our reopening. While we don't have a certain date, we do hope it will be by midsummer, and we are building a plan that we'll submit to Governor Beshear under his formal review process, building a plan that gives confidence to visitors that they can visit the Speed safely, maintain social distancing, understand how we clean our spaces and our air, and also for our staff, because we're not just a public facility, we're a workplace, and how we can rotate people in or out, let them continue working from home, and continue giving them confidence, just like our visitors, that this is one of the safest places to be in the community. So stay tuned for that. We're gonna start the drumbeat. Lots of uncertainties ahead, but I know like many of us are starting to feel like we may be seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, and I wanna let you know that we are planning for that actively and can't wait. But until then, we're excited to join with you every Friday night on these gatherings, and I'm gonna let Abby Shue take over from here and kick it off.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you all so much for joining us. This has truly been a lot of fun for us to learn how to connect with you all in new ways, and you have been incredibly generous since we've had to close with your continued support for the museum and also with learning with us about what it was going to look like to suddenly convene everyone virtually. So your support just really means more to us now than ever, and we look forward to getting to see you all every Friday night. I also want to thank Stolkeen and Ogden. They are the corporate supporters for the Patron Circle events throughout the year and helping to make all of these possible for us every Friday night. So a big thank you to them. And I hope that you all will all join me in raising a glass. Cheers to you all. Thank you for everything that you guys do for this feed, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Cheers.
I'm also going to tell you a little bit about the format for tonight's talk. So this one's particularly exciting. I think to date we've had just one curator every Friday, and this Friday we get to hear from Dean, Erika, and Miranda all about the artist Hilma Klint, as well as the film Beyond the Visible that was made about her career. And we're going to hear a little bit of an interview from the director of the film. So we've got a tight schedule. We're going to kind of pack the presentation, and during that time I'm going to ask that you all put your microphones on mute, but there is a little chat function. I'm going to say hello now so that it pops up on your screen, and if you do have any questions or if you're having any difficulty hearing, please type and let us know there, and we'll make sure that we can kind of help you. And then at the end of the conversation, we'll come back together and ask some questions, and then we'll go into small little breakout rooms. It's actually really fun. This has been one of our favorite parts because, you know, when you go to an event and you already know people, you end up mingling with them a lot. And in these chat rooms, it's very random. So you're going to end up meeting new folks. I actually met donors last Friday who I had not ever met in person. So we're all doing a lot of meeting and connecting with new people, and it's been a lot of fun for us. And then lastly, I'm going to introduce you all to the newest edition of the Speeds Advancement team, who moved to Louisville about 6 weeks ago now. None of us have met her yet in person, and so we are all dying to do that, but she's been a delightful addition. She's managing our patron circle, and that's Eska Kester.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Some of you saw me at the Friday events in the past, but just quickly, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, Abby. Thank you for everyone. I am originally from Poland, but I've lived in the States for quite a long time. I moved here from LA with my husband, who's from Louisville. We wanted to be closer to family, to raise our kids, and to be able to work in this incredible institution is just a dream for me. So I used to be a professional violinist, and just changed over to arts management, and it suits me much better. My job is basically to connect you to things that you love and to each other, and to engage and grow Patron Circle membership. So if you have any questions or concerns ever, reach out to me. I'm really excited to meet you all in person eventually, hopefully later this summer. So thank you again. I'm thrilled to be here.
Hey there. So I'm going to jump in and tell you a little bit about this documentary called Beyond the Visible, Hilma Klint. So we had been planning to screen this film at the Speed Cinema before we closed. It had been booked for an April weekend date, and Erika Holmquist-Wall, the Speed's Curator of European painting and sculpture, knew her work as well, was extremely excited, and was planning to do one of the post-screening discussions with us. When all of the cinemas across the country closed suddenly, a lot of the independent film distributors, including the distributor for Beyond the Visible, were quickly able to pivot and to provide these virtual screening spaces for cinemas. And they would share the box office from the streaming with the institutions that were promoting the screenings. I've been working with Zeitgeist Film for over 20 years, and the two bookers for the film also reached out to me and offered to set up a Zoom discussion with the director, Halina, Dyrschka, who is based in Berlin. And we were able to connect both me, Erika, and Miranda Lash, who had just returned from her maternity leave, and had taken a group of Speed donors from the Speed Contemporary group to New York to see Hilma af Klint's retrospective at the Guggenheim Museum, which broke all attendance records. It's their highest attended exhibition of all time. So right now, or last Saturday, we had that opportunity to do this discussion with the director, find out more details about Hilma af Klint, about her process of making the film and her approach. And we are going to see a short segment from that film, and then we'll bounce back, and you'll hear a little bit from each of us. So Karen, do you want to take it away?
I think too, it's interesting that you've been able to discover so much and surface so much, given the fact that she's fairly idiosyncratic, right? She's rejecting the art market and kind of like the usual, career track, and available to her. I mean, her spiritualist, her beliefs are informing everything. So the fact that you're able to dig that much deeper is, she made it hard for you. I'll say, maybe that's a way of putting it.
Okay.
Exactly.
But we all work with and really support the decisions of artists about the ways that they would like to have their work presented, preserved, exhibited, and in a Klint's case, it's very, very specific too about not having this work enter a market to be seen together too.
Yeah.
And then we have the very complex situation with her spiritual practice and her strong interest in science. And those things not being like one or the other, but a combination of both.
Yeah, and it's not a contradiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is probably the main and most interesting part, I would say, about Hilma af Klint's work. I have to say, for me, this is going beyond art. I made a very clear point here, of course, to tell, okay, she was first, art history had been written, and honestly, I did that. And now I've done with it. I wouldn't stay here and said, repeating that all the time, because it was very important, I think, because otherwise nobody would have listened. That was my feeling in the beginning. That's how we got the interest of people who say, oh, look, he was someone else. But what I think is so very important is that she is an artist and a human being that is really trying to get rid of her own ego and trying to create something really significant. And that is something that you can just get if you get rid of your own, of yourself somehow a bit. And that's the way how she went, and she went with the spiritual way. And also Kandinsky tried that. I mean, he was interested in the same things as she was. Mondrian was a theosophist his whole life. So we have many, at this time, it was, of course, the zeitgeist somehow, right? But in the end, what I don't understand is, or let's say, what I find so very, very interesting now with her, she's turning now everything upside down. So, of course, the art world is asking themselves, and I do know, as your museum, you are institutions, you work, you have to make money, and that's completely clear. Why not also include somebody who has a different point of view? This can just open up so many possibilities, and it's so great because nothing stays as it is. So probably this is a really important. I mean, that she is the only one so far. Maybe you find even more, but this is, there's one, I don't know if you know him, who was also a painter, and he has a museum in New York. And he was also a theosophist and a Buddhist and living in, in Asia for 20 years. But also, he's not included into the museums because he said, you can't buy my works. And I think this is a very, this is simply tremendous, fantastic thought. As you say, you know, I'm creating something, but it's not about, I'm not going to play the rules that mankind has created on this planet, not life. This is really important. And that's what you feel. And I think this is why people feel so attached by that, because the work really speaks to you. You can connect with the work because you can also encounter yourself in those works. Not even just it's life, but also part of yourself. And this comes with all the whole philosophy behind that. Hilma af Klint has not only studied those different kind of philosophies, Buddhistic theosophy, she also tried really to make them visible. Yeah, she really made them visible somehow. And this is the first time we really have the feeling that somebody succeeded in that. Because for me, for example, and that is just a personal thing, Kandinsky, I think, who is, I mean, this is a running gag in my film, of course, that I say all the time, he wrote it, I'm the first. And I think, that's how it was. But he was more interested in a career. And I think that's the reason why he couldn't succeed in this way, how Hilma af Klint succeeded. He made great paintings, no question. But when I'm standing in front of a Kandinsky, I don't feel the same as when I'm standing in front of Hilma af Klint. And actually, I have never experienced anything like that as in a Hilma af Klint exhibition. And that makes it so very, very special. And if it helps to just, you know, to switch or just get your look a little bit in another direction, a lot of is achieved, let's say, yeah? And then you have achieved a lot. And I think everybody can do that. And it makes life even more funny. And I think Hilma af Klint would also like that. And I really like the idea that she's included in museums right now and in shows, because that makes her even more visible, her work, her oeuvre visible. But in the end, I hope she gets her own place. Oh, yeah. I really hope that she gets her own place. I mean, some of her works can travel, but I think we need a place where people can rest and can come to themselves. And actually the temple idea, the whole, the temple, the museum idea, the temple idea of Hilma af Klint is even going much further than the Guggenheim, because Hilma af Klint, she also had this spiral, of course, in the temple. But in the end, she created, when you're going through this temple and watching 193 of her paintings, and at the end you see the altar pieces, and then there's a tower, an astronomic tower in the middle. And then after you have seen everything, you have to walk up the stairs to the tower, and then you watch the universe. And I think this is such a fabulous idea. And as far as I know, nothing like that existed, that I really do hope that the Swedes will build that, or will be able to start this thought, because people will really appreciate that, coming to a place, and that art is now connected really to life can even help all the museums and all the artists, I think, because you take a deeper look.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to kind of jump in and move the discussion forward and give you some insight into why and how I got so excited that Dean was presenting this documentary when we found out that it was coming. And then the chance to talk to Halina. You can see when, you know, just from that clip, her energy and her passion and her enthusiasm. And I mean, I too would give her funding for any documentary that she wants to do. I first discovered af Klint about 20 years ago when I was in graduate school and working on Scandinavian topics, and having to kind of dip into early 20th century periodicals and design magazines and art reviews coming out of Sweden. And of course, they're not translated. And in our interview, Halina too admitted that she had to learn Swedish to just to kind of keep up with the topic. So I could relate, because you all of a sudden you see this material and you want to know everything about it, and you'll find any way you can, including learning a language. And I think there were two strikes against Af Klint's work, really kind of being exposed up until this point through the rest of the 20th century. One is that she really didn't, she eschewed the art market. She wasn't interested in the economy of art, in the exchange of money. She was completely driven, like Halina said, to kind of shed her ego and just, this pure spiritual, just paint this, other planes, right? And Stephen has pulled up images of her work that you can see. It's like you can just walk right into them. So first of all, she's completely rejecting the economy. So somebody like Kandinsky, of course, a lot of artists are trying to get their work in museums or shows, and the industry of art, the economy of art and the art market. So that was one strike against her. Of course, she's a woman, so it makes it a little bit easier in the Scandinavian countries, but the rest of Europe, forget it. And also the Scandinavian countries are pretty insular. And so not a lot gets translated into English, and there is still so much work to do. So when I first encountered her work, I was like, who is this artist? I've never seen anything like it before. Here she is working in the years, even, 5 years before Kandinsky, and concerning the spiritual and art. It was kind of mind-blowing. And of course, you just kind of file it away and you're like, oh, someday I'll return to it. I'd love to learn more. There's just a zillion topics to dig into and dive into. And, of course, I had a whole different thesis topic to work on. So it was just one of those things that you just encountered in these, in Swedish art books of the early 20th century. But then discovering that this film had been made, it just was, it made me really, really happy. And then, of course, we're going to hear from Miranda, who had a chance to actually see the show, which, and I know some of you, too, saw it as well. So that's just kind of my introduction, how I came to her. So me as a trained art historian, if I had to kind of wiggle and wend my way into her work, it's that much more difficult for the general public. And it definitely does take filmmakers like Halina, really brave curators, to show the work and to take that risk. And I think talking to her just really, it was a nice shot in the arm to really, keep fighting the good fight when it comes to artists whose stories need to be told.
Yeah, well, just to pick up on what Erika said, it was such a joy to be able to see the show with Speed Contemporary. I'm looking at many of you who are with me on that special visit. That was so awesome. And one of the things that made it particularly enjoyable is that we actually got to go into the Guggenheim before it was open to the public, and we had our own private docent take us through the entire show. This was an exceptional experience because, as Dean mentioned, it broke all attendance records at the Guggenheim. Just so to actually have time to spend with those paintings without being crowded or rushed was really special. And at the Guggenheim, it began with her representational work, and I really loved being able to appreciate, and they appear in the film. For example, her works of flowers, her depictions of landscapes, her depictions of animals. It really shows you that she was exquisitely trained in the classical tradition, and then it gets into her embrace of theosophy and spiritualist practice, and so you really come to understand that it is very much a philosophical, scientific, all-encompassing endeavor. One of my favorite parts about the film is that it really emphasized that research is always a very alive and active process. So when you watch the film, if you haven't already seen it, she'll talk about discoveries that came up even in the process of editing the film. Like, for example, the long held misconception that she didn't show in her lifetime. And while they were actually in the final editing stages of the film, they discovered a postcard sent from London where she says how happy she is to have hung her paintings in London. And to me, the most horrifying moment of the film also was to see where her paintings were originally stored before, where they were held in trust for 20 years. Again, just to recap, she actually knew how ahead of her time she was, and requested that her paintings not be shown for 20 years following her death. And that was yet another reason there was a delayed reaction to her work. And so you see this like dark, dank basement where these things were being kept. And I have to say, having worked with a number of artists who are further advanced in their careers, that is not uncommon to find an incredibly accomplished artist whose work is just stored in the craziest, most haphazard way. And it really makes us feel good as art historians that there is work to do in the sorting and the pulling. And Halina very much described the joy of getting to go through those notebooks and feeling close to Klint as a person. So yeah, I mean, absolutely exquisite experience. It's a bit insider baseball, but it's fascinating to note that the show you see in the movie is not the same as the Guggenheim show. So there was a very popular show that traveled throughout Europe, broke all attendance records in Europe, that was Beyond the Visible. That's a separate show from the Guggenheim. The Guggenheim actually knew that show existed and wanted to do their own and receive their own credit, which I think is another fascinating question about the art world and who gets credit for what scholarship. But I thought that was just another fascinating twist. So I'll open it back up to Dean, just to keep us rolling.
Yeah, it's if you haven't seen the film already, it's still available. You just go on to the Speed Cinema page, and there's a link that will connect you with the film. And once again, half of the proceeds go back to support the Speed as well too. So it was an incredible experience to be able to continue to bring the work or make the work that we had already been planning to screen available to audiences as well. So, and not have to wait until we were open again, where, you know, we'll have to have reduced capacity and be really concerned about social distancing too. I think this is going to, in the same way, the film had opened in Berlin for about a week before the cinema closed there as well. So it was doing really well too. But this is just so wonderful to be able to also work with my other curatorial colleagues who brought such wonderful stories out during our interview as well. The full interview is going to be available on the Speed site starting on Monday. And we'll be running that film or making that film available for a few more weeks as well.
I want to ask a question, really of all of you, but I think especially of Erika and Miranda, because I think the story of Hilma af Klint is not as unusual as it should be about women artists. So I hope all of you will remember how Erika put together our version of a show she called Women Artists in the Age of Impressionism, which had a lot of stories, not unlike Hilma af Klint. Miranda and Erika have each separately and together been acquiring a lot of works by women artists, some of whom were not recognized at the time they were made, some of whom are contemporary. They're both going to be installing newly acquired works, we hope in time for the Speed's reopening this summer. But Erika, and then maybe Miranda, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you thought about other women whose work, women artists whose work you've been adding to the collection or exhibiting at the Speed in light of this documentary.
You know, as I mentioned before, it just reaffirmed, you know, as far as like relighting that fire. You know, over the course of my curatorial career, I've you know, at other institutions, I've tried to pitch major shows on women artists. And, you know, oftentimes you get the pushback, well, there's no name recognition. Nobody knows who that is. It's not a Monet or a Van Gogh. And so for me to see the work of Halina and the work of my fellow curatorial colleagues that are breaking down these boundaries and moving the needle forward, and I think it's that much easier now in, you know, 2019 and 2020, and, you know, since we even did the Women Artists show, we can have that conversation. I mean, even as I can think of as recently as 10 years ago, I had the pushback of the name recognition, and nobody wants to see a show by a woman artist that nobody knows. You know, even though it's groundbreaking, really important historical material and helps retell the story. So for me, it's a pretty great time to be a curator, because it's always been a personal passion to, I mean, and I can speak with my curatorial colleagues, is like, that's the thrill, right? Is discovering these artists and seeing how they can, you know, refit into the canon and shake it up and retell these stories. There is so much to learn and uncover. And like Miranda pointed out, the fact that research is still ongoing and that she was still discovering all of the, you know, putting the puzzle together while the film is in post-production is pretty incredible. And that's oftentimes, you know, I think the point was made during the interview about how curators, oftentimes you have to work so fast and just get the work up on the walls. And then stuff starts bubbling up once you get the show up, and you just keep moving that forward. So the fact that the Speed has been so supportive, and its supporters have been so supportive of us acquiring so much work by women artists recently in these past couple of years, it's really been a joy. I think among American institutions, we're right up there as far as the percentage of female artists that we've been able to bring into the collection. And you know, that changes the whole feel and look of the entire permanent collection as well.
Yeah, similarly, I'm so grateful to the Speed for supporting our work and promoting women artists. I've worked very hard since we reopened to make sure that contemporary galleries always have parity in gender in terms of who is being displayed. And actually, a particularly proud moment for me was about a year after we reopened. The famed artist Judy Chicago, noted feminist artist, was visiting the University of Louisville campus. And I've seen her speak before, and she started to go into you know, this warranted rant about how most museums do not have parity in their galleries. And I was so proud to be able to say, actually, at the Speed, we made sure that our contemporary galleries always have parity gender-wise in who we're showing. So I was so proud to be able to say that. I'm grateful to the Speed to being open to also welcoming people who identify as female and may not, you know, and non-binary conforming individuals into the discussion. About 2 years ago, we started using pronouns. They supported the show Breaking the Mold, Investigating Gender at the Speed, where we got to talk about an expanded version of what it means to be a woman and how we understand femininity. And it was a joy to acquire artists like Kelty Ferris, who's a wonderful female painter whose work, if you recall in the body prints, also pushes the boundaries of how you understand the female body and how she presented her body. So I agree absolutely with Erika. It's a really exciting time to be a curator and push forward ideas at the Speed.
Well, thank you both for such exciting additions to the collection by women artists going, I think, at least back to 1799 and then up to the current year. I want to call on a friend of ours who's just rejoined the call, and I'm really glad, Aldi Milliken, who's my friend, our friend, and our peer as an arts leader in Louisville. You see a picture, Aldi just emailed me the picture. I just switched to my backdrop, and I want him to join us and tell his Hilda af Klint story, because it's a really good one. Thanks, Aldi, for coming back in.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, everybody. Nice to see you all. This is one of my favorite topics, how art institutions can reevaluate history. I mean, we're, as museums of the 21st century, we can rethink and reposition some of these really important artists that have been forgotten through time. And I feel like I've been part of that history as well, specifically with Hilma af Klint. And Stephen's background and my background are almost the same. We're mirror opposite images because I had the opportunity of showing the af Klint work that was in the Guggenheim, these 3 paintings that you see behind me, in 2006. I was able to meet Gustav af Klint and to visit with him and talk about his great aunt. You know, it's a really interesting family. He was a sea captain, not really interested in the art world. And I think it was how she positioned her work, what her work meant to her, and how she felt like as a woman, she couldn't really be recognized in the art world. And I think she felt as sort of a mystic. She couldn't be appreciated for the work that she was performing, the research that she was doing through her artistic practice. And I was introduced by a work from an artist and a colleague named Ronald Jones. And many of the Swedes by the late 90s and 2006 were already thinking about her work and repositioning her work in their work. And this particular show actually was quite important because Massimiliano Gioni happened to visit the institution during this time. He was curating the Berlin Biennial, looking at artists that I was working with, and I sent him a book in Swedish of the Klint work, and then he put her work in the Venice Biennial a few years later, and then sort of started this long chain of appreciation of her work. And so I feel like in some small way I was part of history in a sense, in this opportunity. Sweden's a really special country, I think, in how they support their artists, and there's a lot of state support. And I think I mentioned to somebody that Hilma would have been was the first female in the class at the National Academy, the Kungliga Academy of Art in Stockholm. But I still feel like she really did not, even though she was an academy trained artist, she was not an outsider at all. She still probably struggled in entering into the sort of the canon that was really male driven at that time. Luckily, the Guggenheim the Guggenheim, is taken up that. The Guggenheim really is the perfect venue in a way for her work, and I actually visited 2 or 3 times that exhibition because it really was quite a special show. So in many ways, we all and you all were able to, I think, see really a wrong being righted in our institutions, and I think that's what this film is doing as well, is really furthering and deepening our appreciation of her work. So it's great that the Speed is taken up this project and showing the work, because it's really important for all of us to see and think about her work, especially at this time. Really, the way she was performing artistic research. Hopefully will add to how we reevaluate what both art institutions do for us, and then also our relationship to artists. So I would love to continue. I've got a family call.
Thank you, Aldi, for interrupting your night and to rejoin us. I love that story because it also reminds us that curatorial work and museum work and art history is a community.
Yeah.
Is a long commute, a long life, a centuries long at times. And thank you. We have 4 of you now who played a role in this artist's ongoing life. So thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you all. Great to see you. I'm going to have to see you next Friday as well.
Right.
Okay, come back.
Take care, everybody. Thanks again.
And now we do have a little time before a couple minutes if people have questions for the curators or others here.
I have a question for Dean. Dean, remind me, is this Halina's first film?
It's her first. She did a couple short films earlier, but this is her first documentary film. And it was primarily by reading about the exhibition. And when the exhibition opened at the Hamburger Bahnhof, she reached out and got invited to the opening night, met the main curator and said, is there a film that has been made on of Klint before, given that the show had already opened in Sweden and was a huge success there before, and there wasn't. And she said, well, there is now. I'm going to make this. So it's fantastic to have this. And to have the incredible research, that she discussed with us, all come to light too, and the ways that it takes our views of European art history and of the history of abstraction, completely blows it apart too. So, but I also thought, Miranda, you asked an incredible question too, or made a statement too, that abstraction is something that's not just part of the Western tradition too, as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I was, one of the things that I was just responding to something she said, where she said, I don't think anyone's ever thought of a spiral tower that opens up to the sky and has abstract art. And I was like, well, the Maya did. And it's called the Caracol in the Yucatan. And pretty much, it's the spiral, it's the snail. It's literally that. And I told her, the thing is, Halina, once you break down one wall, all the walls come tumbling down. And all of a sudden you start questioning, like, why haven't pre-Columbian traditions or African traditions or Asian traditions also been considered part of the trajectory of abstract art? So, if we're going to take down, that abstraction was invented in 1910, we probably want to start investigating which century we want to start looking at as well, for the history of abstraction.
Yeah, that was a fantastic point too, as part of the discussion. So.
Yeah, something I loved about the film that Halina said that she really wanted to emphasize was Hilma's love of nature. And there were so many gorgeous shots of sunsets, flora, fauna, how Hilma's paintings were so even with the structure of atoms. I mean, to me, that's where the beauty and like the feeling of exile comes for me in being in front of her work, how it's so connected to nature.
Well, thank you all. Now before it's too late, let's have a moment, Karen, to do your magic, and we'll break into small groups to say hello and check in with each other, and then we'll come back in to say good night and send you on your way for the evening. So hang on, we're gonna all reconfigure and come back into small groups together. Who came to Louisville, about 6 years ago now to run KMAC. And but he had lived in Stockholm for at least 15 years before that, where he'd run a contemporary art gallery. And so this is a picture behind me or whatever that Aldi sent when he was showing Hilma af Klint's work in 2006 in Stockholm.
So does he own pieces of her work?
The thing is, they won't sell it. And we didn't quite get, maybe we'll come back to that story. There's only 1 or 2 works that are not owned by the foundation or the estate or whatever. And part of the whole thing is this mystique that she didn't want it to become part of the market. It was a very interesting story.
Did she also make clothes in the picture of Aldi's gallery, which I assume that's Aldi's gallery, that looks like there's clothes behind your left shoulder? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think those are by her.
Yeah.
I think it was he did an exhibit where he must have been doing a theme or something. I don't know what it was, but he said he only had 3 of these Hilma af Klint's.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Maybe we should also just introduce ourselves. I know all of you, but why don't we go ahead and say hi?
Okay, I'll start. I'm Juliette Gray. I actually think I know all of you too. but there it is. Stephen is so close and yet so far. I think we're just a stone's throw away, and yet here we are, distance.
Yeah. Keith?
And we're tuning in from Nashville.
Oh.
Where we are
you
where we're hunkered down for the coronavirus at my house.
Well, that's great, because that's nice to know. Otherwise, I would have assumed you were in Juliet in my neighborhood, in our neighborhood. That's great.
Will Cantliner, I'm over by Bowman Field, so not that far from Stephen and Juliet.
Yeah. Will has been a volunteer at the Speed. He grew up at the Speed, kind of, because his mother was very involved, and he volunteered for us, and now on our board of governors. So we're glad to have you.
I'm Karen Tate, Advancement and Programming Events Manager at the Speed Art Museum. Nice to meet all of you.
Yeah, Jeff and Susan Callan, we're here, and we're in our home here in Louisville. We're not on the West Coast.
I saw the exhibit in New York. It
Oh,
was fantastic. Yeah.
Susan, you were Susan and I were with Miranda on the trip that we took in, I think it was January or February of 2019, so just last year. It was a truly remarkable, a very moving exhibit. It was a lot to look at, a lot to think about. It was really beautiful.
could you say a little more about what exactly moved you? I mean, what details, what feeling? Give me a little.
Oh, well, Susan might be, maybe we should both talk about it, but I'll start with, it was really interesting to think about the level of abstraction that she had and how it really predated anything in the Western canon at that point. You know, a lot of these monumental paintings she was making in 1890, and, you know, Picasso didn't step forward with abstraction until 1910, 15, something like that. So, you know, she was thinking about things and working on a scale. She was thinking about things that were, you know, very nature-based, but abstracting them. And then she was working on this very monumental scale. Some of these paintings are, Stephen might know the dimensions more specifically, but I think that they're, you know, 15 feet tall. I mean, they're very, very large. And she had, you know, so many themes running through them all. And it was clearly so comprehensive. It wasn't just a whim. She had spent years working on these themes and these works. And so you really could see that it was a deep passion of hers to try and abstract the things that were in her mind. It was beautiful. And her palette, you know, it's a very, you know, soft palette, you know, so it felt really very calming, you know, so it was it felt like a meditation, felt like walking through the exhibit was like a visual meditation.
What I could add
from Susan. Go ahead, Susan.
Okay,
yeah.
what I could add is there were so many swirls and circles and symbols. Like and I bought, you know, a little bag, and so here's like this, you know, eye kind of thing, almost like an Egyptian kind of mystical religious feel to it. And one thing nobody's mentioned, but I noticed, is there's a Jewish mystical tradition called Kabbalah, and there was one particular of her very, very large format paintings that had what they call in mystical, it's called the Tree of Life, and it's, you know, circles with branches and circles and branch and circle, and it represents all kinds of levels of the universe, or some people say attributes of God, or levels of power. And I don't know if she did that purposely, if that truly was something she learned, this Kabbalistic mystical symbol, or if it just occurred to her. She also did, Keith, a lot of kind of automatic writing. She wrote backwards, and she did that method that, who did it? The Surrealists started doing, you know, automatic writing.
I got it, you know, the guy in Mexico that
wrote backwards
too. Because he was
dyslexic.
Was it dyslexia, or he was high functioning autism, or?
I think dyslexic, he said.
Yeah.
The severe dyslexia. Yeah.
Yeah. It was. We bought it. We bought his piece, right? We bought the that artist from De La Hoya or something. Is that his name?
I can't. Mexican. I can't remember.
Yeah. One more.
Well, Stephen, they mentioned.
One thing I would add. Oh, go ahead. Is it just quickly? Is it, Keith? It's hard. The reproductions, they're beautiful, but they're different in person. And there's something about they do kind of draw you in this way that's really simple. And I think knowing that the work is 110, 120 years old compounds it because it feels so fresh. But I didn't see the Guggenheim, but I saw it at the Venice Biennale, and you just can't really not stop and just let it suck you in. And it's, I don't know, there's something about the way it resonates today, I guess, in a way that we probably wouldn't have seen them the same 20 years ago. It's really, but they're worth seeking out if you can ever see them in person.
Well,
So Will, go ahead.
I responded to it with two different viewpoints. One is as a artist, and the other is as a psychiatrist. And as an artist, I was almost always, when I encounter other artists, I'm interested in their process. You know, what is their creative process and how do they go from what they feel to what they do? And I right away picked up on that early serialism, the automatic writing, you know, those ones she did between 1906 and 8. It feels like the automatic writing. It's that vague sense, you know, she's in a dream state, and it just felt very authentic to me. And so much of what she said spiritually, Jung comes later to acknowledge that we all have both feminine and masculine in us. And so in a way, she was sort of on the mark about that. And I was, interestingly, the only non-religious leader on the Spiritual Heritage Foundation group on religion, and which represented all of the religions in Louisville with the heads. And I was sort of always saying to them, well, what's your religious belief and faith and why? And I came to a very similar conclusion. They all kind of come from the same source, that if you step back and go, what do you have in common instead of what do you have different? It was, I was sort of felt she had come to that because it's sort of just a universal truth. So I would, I didn't know anything about it until this film. It's great. I would love to have seen that show.
One more thing, you know, she went to seances and this whole philosophy, this theosophy, and she followed this Madame Blavatsky and believed all of this. And I'm wondering if somehow she learned to put herself into a trance and painted while she was in that state, because it has this sort of hallucinogenic, dreamlike, trance-like feel to it.
I think I'd agree with you. It was like that very early automatic writing.
It was she was kind of presented like that in the film when they showed her painting, and you know, the shadow, I mean, you didn't see her face on, it was a dreamlike kind of a quality to it for me.
Yeah.
Will, what do you think? What were you thinking?
Well, this was more of a question than really a thought, but they talked about just how quickly she transitioned into doing more abstract art. And I just was curious if you had a better take on, it didn't really say when that was. Was that early in her, after she graduated? Was that while she was still studying? I mean, when did she decide to go from that landscaping portrait to really she just went all in on the abstract art?
Who can answer that?
I mean, I think in the film, I think she transitioned around maybe 1910, 1911, 12, something like that. No?
Before, because no.
Before?
Yeah.
But she was still doing some of the other stuff during that time. I don't know. We watched a film about a week ago.
That reminds me, I was very fascinated by her definition of abstract painting was thought forms before it was bound by language. And also I've noticed, just me personally, I started out as a humanistic black and white photographer and ended up doing abstracts. And C.J. Pressman, another local artist, did the same thing. He ended up going from the mimetic, and there's some kind of pull as you try to get a bigger and bigger picture that we just did it, you know, and so maybe there's some connection here.
So get ready, Karen, we're about to evaporate and reconfigure in the group again. Thank you for making all this work.
Yeah, you're welcome, and see you all back there in just a few seconds.
Karen.
Maybe. wonder if it's gonna, that's weird.
Oh, great.
Everybody's back.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I'm so happy that we were all able to get together, and art has a unique way to fill during times of crisis like this, and it's thanks to people like you that we're able to be here and continue to be a resource for our community. So thank you all so much. One of our donors said today that Speed is resourceful and resilient, and we will all weather this storm. So I'm so appreciative. I wanted to also invite you to, for next week, we're going to be hosting, I believe, Erika, Dean, and Shannon to talk a little bit more about Speed Online and the 3 tracks that we have going on with Speed Cinema, Art Sparks, education activities for kids, and Museum from Home. So they'll be sharing a little bit more of what we're offering. And again, we're more grateful than ever right now for your generous support for our mission and our work. And we wish you all a wonderful weekend, wonderful Derby day, a little bit different than usual. And stay well, be safe, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Great.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.